I never thought I'd end up cleaning someone else's mansion in Beverly Hills. But life has a funny way of surprising you. 3 years ago, I moved to California from Ohio with nothing but a suitcase and hope. The job posting was simple. Housekeeper needed for private residence. Good pay, discretion required. What they didn't mention was that I'd be working for Victoria and Richard Ashworth, a couple whose wealth seemed to grow by the day while their humanity shrank. The Ashworth estate sprawled across 2 acres of perfectly manicured gardens. Inside, everything screamed money. Italian marble floors that I'd spend hours polishing until they gleamed, crystal chandeliers that required careful dusting with special cloths, and artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. The place felt more like a museum than a home, cold and untouchable. Victoria Ashworth was the kind of woman who wore designer clothes to breakfast and never had a hair out of place. She moved through the house like she owned not just the building, but everyone in it. And maybe she did. From day one, she made it clear that I was beneath her notice, except when I wasn't invisible enough. "Maria," she'd call out, even though my name is Sarah. I corrected her once, politely, and she just stared at me with those ice-blue eyes until I looked away. After that, I stopped trying. She'd drop her silk scarves on the bathroom floor and leave her jewelry scattered across the vanity, knowing I'd clean it up. If I accidentally made eye contact while serving dinner, she'd give me this look that made me feel like I'd committed some terrible crime. The worst part wasn't the way she treated me like furniture. It was how she seemed to enjoy making me feel small. She'd ask me to redo tasks I'd already completed perfectly, claiming they weren't up to her standards. She'd schedule dinner parties for 30 people and give me 2 hours' notice, then complain when everything wasn't flawless. I learned to keep my head down, do my work, and disappear into the background. But Richard was different from the start. Where Victoria was all sharp edges and cold stares, he had this warmth about him that caught me off guard. He'd actually look at me when he spoke, not through me like I was glass. Most mornings he'd stop by the kitchen where I was preparing breakfast and ask how I was doing. Not in that fake, polite way some rich people do, but like he actually wanted to know. "Good morning, Sarah," he'd say, using my real name. The first time he did it, I almost dropped the coffee pot. He'd pour himself a cup and lean against the counter, sometimes telling me about his business trips or asking about my family back in Ohio. These conversations never lasted long. Victoria would appear, and he'd straighten up, becoming the dutiful husband again. But for those few minutes, I felt like a real person instead of just the help. I told myself his kindness was just good manners, the way some wealthy people try to be decent to their staff. But there was something in his eyes when he looked at me. Something that made my stomach flutter in a way I tried to ignore. He was handsome, sure, tall and well-dressed, with graying hair at his temples that made him look distinguished. But it wasn't just that. It was the way he seemed to really see me when everyone else looked right through me. Richard worked long hours at his investment firm downtown, which meant most days I only dealt with Victoria's constant demands. She had a way of making every interaction feel like a test I was failing. She'd inspect my work with white gloves, literally. She'd rearrange the flowers I'd just arranged because they weren't quite right. She'd change the dinner menu after I'd already started shopping, then act like it was my fault for not reading her mind. I needed the job too badly to quit. The pay was better than anything else I could find, and Victoria knew it. She held that power over me like a weapon, reminding me in little ways every day that I was replaceable, that I was lucky to be there, that I should be grateful for the privilege of scrubbing her toilets and washing her dishes. Some nights, I'd lie in my tiny apartment in Culver City and wonder how long I could keep swallowing my pride. I'd grown up in a working-class family where we didn't have much, but we had dignity. My mother cleaned houses too, but the family she worked for treated her with respect. They remembered her birthday and asked about her kids. They saw her as a person. Here, I was just part of the scenery, expected to blend into the wallpaper until I was needed. I'd perfected the art of moving through the house like a ghost, completing my tasks without disturbing the perfect silence Victoria demanded. I knew which floorboards creaked, which doors squeaked, how to dust around Richard's papers without moving anything even a millimeter. But the isolation was eating away at me, piece by piece. I stopped calling my friends back home as much, because what was there to say? That I spent my days polishing marble and pretending not to exist? that my boss treated me like dirt, and I took it because I needed the money. The person I used to be, confident, outgoing, proud, was disappearing, replaced by someone smaller and quieter and afraid. Still, I stayed. Because despite everything, despite Victoria's cruelty and my shrinking sense of self, there was something about those brief moments with Richard that kept me hoping. Maybe hoping for what? I couldn't say. But hope is sometimes all you have to hold on to when everything else is slipping away. That Tuesday started like any other. I arrived at the Ashworth house at 7 a.m, using my key to slip in through the service entrance. Victoria was still upstairs. I could hear the shower running, and Richard had already left for his early meeting downtown. The house felt peaceful in those quiet moments before the day really began. I had my usual routine down to a science. Coffee first, then breakfast prep, followed by the daily cleaning schedule Victoria left for me on the kitchen counter. Today's list was longer than usual. Deep clean the kitchen floors, reorganize the pantry, polish the silver in the dining room, and vacuum the entire second floor. A full day's work, easily. I'd rushed out of my apartment that morning after oversleeping, skipping my usual bowl of cereal. My stomach had been grumbling for an hour already, but I pushed through it. I needed to finish the kitchen before Victoria came downstairs for her morning smoothie. She hated seeing me work in her spaces when she was around. The kitchen floor was a nightmare of imported Italian tile that showed every speck of dust and required hands and knees scrubbing with a special cleaner that cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a week. I'd been at it for over an hour, working my way across the massive space section by section. My knees were sore, my back ached, and sweat was beading on my forehead despite the morning coolness. When I finally stood up to rinse my cleaning cloth, I caught sight of the refrigerator. Victoria always kept it stocked with organic everything, fruits and vegetables that looked too perfect to be real, imported cheeses, sparkling water from France. I opened it to grab the pitcher of filtered water I was allowed to drink and saw them. A small bowl of red grapes, plump and perfect, sitting on the top shelf. My stomach cramped with hunger. I stared at those grapes for a long moment, calculating. There had to be at least 24 in the bowl. Surely she wouldn't notice if a few went missing. I'd been working for 3 years without ever taking so much as a cracker from their kitchen. I was careful, reliable, honest. What harm could a few grapes do? Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed a small handful, maybe 5 or 6 grapes, and closed the refrigerator door. They were the sweetest things I'd tasted in weeks, bursting with juice that seemed to wake up my whole body. I ate them quickly, standing over the sink, then got back to work with renewed energy. I was humming softly to myself, scrubbing the last corner of the floor, when I heard the sharp click of heels on marble. Victoria's heels had a particular sound, aggressive, purposeful, like tiny hammers striking stone. I glanced at the clock. 9:30. She was earlier than usual. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a white silk robe and matching slippers. Her blonde hair perfectly styled even first thing in the morning. Her eyes did their usual sweep of the room, checking for imperfections, and landed on me, kneeling by the far wall with my scrub brush. "The floor looks acceptable," she said, which from her was practically a compliment. But then she moved toward the refrigerator, and my heart started racing. She opened the door and stood there for a moment, studying the contents like she was taking inventory, which, knowing Victoria, she probably was. My mouth went dry as her gaze landed on the bowl of grapes. "Did you eat these?" The question came out sharp and cold. I could have lied. I could have said I hadn't touched them, that maybe Richard had eaten some before he left. But something in her voice told me she already knew. Maybe she counted them. Maybe she had cameras I didn't know about. Or maybe she just enjoyed testing me. "Yes, ma'am," I said quietly, not looking up from the floor. "I'm sorry. I was hungry and..." That's as far as I got before she exploded. "Hungry?" Her voice rose to a pitch that made me flinch. "You're hungry, so you just help yourself to my food? Food that I bought in my house without asking permission?" I scrambled to my feet, clutching the wet rag in my hands like it could protect me somehow. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashworth. It was just a few grapes. I didn't think..." "That's exactly the problem. You didn't think." She was really shouting now, her face flushed with anger. Do you think I don't notice when things go missing? Do you think I'm stupid? No, ma'am. I never... This is stealing, Sarah. Plain and simple theft. I trusted you in my home, around my things, and you repay that trust by taking whatever you want whenever you want it. The words hit me like physical blows. Stealing. Theft. I'd taken maybe 50 cents worth of grapes after 3 years of perfect service, and she was acting like I'd robbed her blind. I can pay for them, I whispered, knowing how pathetic that sounded. Pay for them? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. This isn't about money. This is about respect. This is about knowing your place. She moved closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the mint of her mouthwash. Her eyes were like ice, cold and cutting. You are here to work, not to treat my home like your personal pantry. I don't care if you're starving. You ask permission before you touch anything that doesn't belong to you. Do I make myself clear? My throat felt tight, and I could feel tears building behind my eyes. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I said, "Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, ma'am," I managed to choke out. "Good. Now finish what you're doing and stay out of my sight for the rest of the day." She turned on her heel and stalked out, leaving me standing in the middle of the kitchen with tears streaming down my face. I felt smaller than I ever had in my entire life. Smaller than when my dad lost his job when I was 12. Smaller than when my first boyfriend broke up with me in front of the whole school. Smaller than the day I realized I couldn't afford college and would have to find work instead. I finished cleaning up my supplies with shaking hands, then headed upstairs to start on the bedrooms. Each step felt heavy, like I was climbing a mountain instead of just going to the second floor. By the time I reached the landing, silent tears were rolling down my cheeks and I couldn't seem to stop them. 3 years of perfect service. 3 years of swallowing my pride and accepting her treatment. And the moment I showed the smallest human need, hunger, she made me feel like a criminal, like I was nothing. I pushed open the door to the master bedroom, expecting to have at least a few minutes to collect myself before diving into my work. Instead, I found Richard standing by the window, still in his business suit, watching me with concerned eyes. I froze in the doorway, my cleaning supplies clutched in one hand, the other quickly wiping at my cheeks. Richard wasn't supposed to be home. He had meetings all morning, wouldn't usually return until after lunch. But there he was, leaning against the window frame in his charcoal gray suit, his tie loosened, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Ashworth," I stammered, taking a step back. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here. I can come back later to clean." "Don't." His voice was quiet but firm. "Come in, Sarah." I hesitated, then stepped into the room, careful to keep my eyes down. The master bedroom was Victoria's domain more than his. All white silk and gold accents, like something from a magazine. I'd cleaned it hundreds of times, but having Richard watch me felt different, uncomfortable in a way I couldn't name. I moved stiffly around the bed, starting with the nightstands like always. My hands were still shaking slightly, and I focused on that simple task. Dusting, organizing, making everything perfect. Maybe if I kept busy, he wouldn't notice I'd been crying. Maybe he wouldn't ask questions I didn't want to answer, but I could feel his eyes following me as I worked. Not in a creepy way. Richard had never made me feel unsafe or uncomfortable like that. It was more like he was studying me, trying to figure something out. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke again. What happened downstairs? The question was so gentle, so different from Victoria's harsh demands, that it almost broke me all over again. I paused in my dusting, gripping the cloth tighter. "Nothing, sir. Just nothing." "Sarah." There was something in the way he said my name that made me look up despite myself. His brown eyes were warm, concerned. What happened? And just like that, the walls I'd built up crumbled completely. It all came pouring out, the grapes, Victoria's shouting, the way she'd called me a thief over something so small. But as I talked, it became about more than just that morning. 3 years of being treated like furniture came spilling out of me. The wrong name, the impossible standards, the way she made me feel invisible and worthless at the same time. "She makes me feel so small," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Like I'm nothing, like I don't matter at all." Richard listened without interrupting. his face growing more serious with every word. When I finally ran out of things to say, the room fell quiet, except for my shaky breathing. "You didn't deserve that," he said finally, his voice soft but certain. "Not any of it. No one had ever said that to me before. Not about this job, not about the way Victoria treated me. Everyone always told me I should be grateful, that good jobs were hard to find, that I should just put up with it. But Richard was telling me I deserved better, and something about hearing those words from him made my chest tight with emotion. He pushed away from the window and walked toward me. I should have stepped back. He was my employer, Victoria's husband, completely off limits in every way that mattered. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, holding my breath, as he stopped in front of me. "You're not nothing, Sarah," he said quietly. "You're not invisible." His hand reached up slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. When I didn't move, his fingers brushed against my cheek, wiping away a tear I didn't realize had fallen. His touch was so gentle, so careful, like I was something precious that might break. I'd been touched by men before, of course. I'd had boyfriends in high school, a few dates since moving to California, but this felt different. Maybe because it was Richard, who'd been kind to me when no one else was. Maybe because I was emotionally raw and desperate for someone to see me as human. Or maybe because there had always been something between us, some undercurrent of awareness that we'd both been pretending didn't exist. "I see you," he whispered, his thumb still tracing along my cheekbone. "I've always seen you." The air in the room changed, became charged with something I was afraid to name. This was wrong. I knew it was wrong. He was married. He was my boss. This could ruin everything. But I was so tired of being nothing, of shrinking myself down until I barely existed. For once, I wanted to be seen, to be wanted, to matter. When he leaned down and kissed me, I didn't pull away. His lips were soft against mine, tentative at first, like he was asking permission. I could have stopped it then, could have stepped back, apologized, pretended it never happened. Instead, I found myself kissing him back, my free hand coming up to rest against his chest. I could feel his heart beating under his shirt, strong and steady and real. This wasn't just happening in my imagination. This wasn't just wishful thinking. Richard Ashworth, who'd been kind to me when his wife treated me like garbage, was kissing me in their bedroom, and I was letting him. More than letting him. I was kissing him back like my life depended on it. The kiss deepened, became hungrier, more desperate. His hands tangled in my hair, and I dropped my cleaning cloth to wrap both arms around his neck. For those few moments, nothing else existed. Not Victoria, not the risks, not the impossibility of it all. Just Richard's mouth on mine, and the feeling of being wanted for the first time in years. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against mine, his eyes still closed like he was trying to memorize the moment. "Sarah," he whispered, my name like a prayer on his lips. I opened my eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. His hair was mussed from my fingers, his lips slightly swollen from kissing. He looked younger somehow, less controlled than the businessman who left for work every morning in his perfect suits. "This is crazy," I said, but I didn't move away from him. I know. His hand was still in my hair, his thumb stroking along my jaw. I know it's crazy, but neither of us stepped back. Neither of us apologized or pretended it hadn't happened. We just stood there in that beautiful, terrible moment, both of us knowing that everything had changed between us, and there was no going back. The invisible line I'd spent 3 years being careful not to cross had just been obliterated completely. And despite everything, the risks, the complications, the certain disaster this would lead to, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt wanted. I felt real. Even if it was wrong, even if it was dangerous, even if it would probably destroy me in the end. In that moment, it felt like the most right thing I'd ever done. The days after that kiss felt like living in a dream I was afraid to wake up from. Nothing had really changed on the surface. I still arrived at 7 every morning, still cleaned the same rooms, still endured Victoria's cold commands and impossible standards. But everything underneath was different now. charged with an electricity that made my skin tingle every time Richard walked into a room. We didn't talk about what had happened. How could we? There was no safe space for that conversation. No moment when Victoria wasn't somewhere in the house, listening, watching, waiting to catch someone making a mistake. But the memory of his kiss lingered between us like a secret written in invisible ink. I found myself paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The way Richard's coffee cup sat on the kitchen counter after he left for work, still warm when I cleared it away. How he'd pause in doorways when I was cleaning nearby, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The careful way he avoided touching me when he handed me things, as if any contact might give us away. But it was the looking that really got to me. Before, our eye contact had been brief, polite, appropriate. Now, when our eyes met across a room, something passed between us that made my heart race. He'd watch me dust the bookshelves in his study, and I'd feel his gaze like a physical touch. I'd glance up from folding laundry to find him staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Hungry, almost desperate. Victoria seemed oblivious to the shift, wrapped up in her usual routine of charity luncheons and shopping trips with her equally cold friends. She treated me with the same dismissive cruelty as always, maybe even worse after the grape incident. She'd taken to leaving me longer task lists, as if punishing me for that moment of human weakness. Clean the baseboards in every room, reorganize the entire pantry, polish every piece of silver until it gleamed. I did it all without complaint. But now I had something to sustain me through her petty cruelties. The memory of Richard's hands in my hair, his breath against my cheek, the way he'd looked at me like I was something precious instead of just the help. It was Thursday morning, exactly 9 days after the kiss, when everything changed again. I was in the guest bathroom, scrubbing tile grout with a toothbrush, one of Victoria's favorite impossible tasks, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, masculine steps. Richard's steps. He was supposed to be at work, had left for an early meeting like always. But there he was, stopping outside the bathroom door. Sarah? My name on his lips still did things to me I didn't want to examine too closely. I sat back on my heels, suddenly aware of how I must look, on my hands and knees in my old jeans and t-shirt, hair falling out of its ponytail, probably smelling like cleaning chemicals. Yes, Mr. Ashworth, can you come here for a minute? I set down my scrub brush and stood up, smoothing my hair back as best I could. When I stepped into the hallway, he was leaning against the wall, still in his suit, but with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, stressed about something. Is everything okay? I asked. He glanced toward the stairs, making sure we were alone, then looked back at me with those brown eyes that had been haunting my dreams. I can't stop thinking about you, he said quietly. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. This was what I'd been hoping to hear and dreading at the same time. Because once we started talking about it, we couldn't pretend it wasn't real anymore. Mr. Ashworth, Richard, he corrected, stepping closer. When we're alone, just Richard. Richard. His name felt strange on my tongue, too intimate, too dangerous. We shouldn't be talking about this. I know we shouldn't. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style. God, I know how wrong this is. You work for us. You're in our house. Victoria is... He trailed off, shaking his head. Your wife, I finished for him. My wife, he agreed. But there was something hollow in the way he said it. Who treats you like garbage. I wanted to defend her, to say something polite about how Mrs. Ashworth was just particular about her standards. But the words wouldn't come, because he was right, and we both knew it. That doesn't matter, I said instead. This can't happen. But even as I said it, I was looking at his mouth, remembering how it felt against mine, and he was moving closer, backing me against the wall, until I could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Tell me you haven't been thinking about it, he said softly. Tell me you haven't been wondering what would happen if we stopped pretending. I couldn't tell him that, because it would be a lie. I'd thought about nothing else for 9 days straight. I'd lie awake at night in my apartment, replaying that kiss over and over, imagining what it would feel like if we didn't stop, if we let ourselves have more. Sarah. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheek just like before. Tell me to walk away. Tell me you don't want this, and I'll never touch you again. We'll pretend none of this happened. I looked into his eyes and saw my own want reflected back at me. This man who'd been kind to me when no one else was, who saw me as more than just the hired help, who made me feel like a woman instead of just a ghost haunting someone else's house. I should have told him to walk away, should have thought about my job, my future, the inevitable disaster this would lead to. But I was so tired of being invisible, of swallowing my needs and wants until I barely remembered what they were. Instead of telling him to leave, I reached up and pulled his mouth down to mine. This kiss was different from the first one, hungrier, more desperate, like we were both drowning and this was our only source of air. His hands tangled in my hair, and I pressed myself against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest through his shirt. He kissed me like he'd been starving for it, like those 9 days of careful distance had been torture for him too. When his tongue swept against mine, I made a sound I'd never made before. Needy, desperate, completely shameless. God, Sarah, he breathed against my lips. What you do to me. His mouth moved to my neck, pressing hot kisses along the sensitive skin there, and I had to bite my lip to keep from moaning out loud. We were in his house, in the hallway where anyone could see us, but I couldn't make myself care. All I could think about was the way his teeth grazed my pulse point, the way his hands gripped my waist like he was afraid I might disappear. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. My lips felt swollen, and I could see lipstick smudged on his mouth, evidence of what we'd done, what we were doing. This is insane, I whispered. Completely, he agreed, but his hands were still on me, still holding me close. If she finds out, she won't. His voice was fierce, certain. I won't let anything happen to you, Sarah, I promise. It was a promise he couldn't possibly keep, and we both knew it. But in that moment, pressed against the wall with his arms around me, I chose to believe him anyway. Living with a secret like ours was like carrying a live wire in my chest. Every day felt electric and dangerous, charged with the possibility of discovery. Richard and I became experts in the art of stolen moments, a brush of fingers when he handed me his coffee cup, lingering glances across the dining room during dinner parties, text messages deleted immediately after reading. He'd started texting me. Simple things at first. Thank you for the excellent work yesterday. Or, could you please organize my study this afternoon? But we both knew they weren't really about work. They were about connection, about having some way to reach each other in the vast space of pretending that stretched between our brief encounters. The messages got bolder as the weeks went on. You looked beautiful this morning. Can't concentrate in my meeting thinking about you. Wish I could kiss you right now. I'd read them in supply closets and bathroom stalls, my heart racing, then delete them like they'd never existed. But it was the physical moments that were slowly driving me crazy. Richard found excuses to be home during the day more often. Important calls he had to take from his study. Lunch meetings that got canceled at the last minute. Documents he forgot and had to come back for. Victoria never seemed to notice. She was too busy with her own social calendar. But I noticed everything. The way he'd find me in empty rooms and steal kisses that left me breathless. How his hands would linger on my waist when he pulled me close. The heat in his eyes when he watched me work, like he was undressing me in his mind. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me with such naked want that I'd have to look away, afraid someone might see. We were playing with fire, and we both knew it. But the flames felt so good after years of cold indifference that I couldn't bring myself to step away from the heat. It was getting harder to act normal around Victoria. Every morning when I served her breakfast, I wondered if she could see the guilt written on my face. When she criticized my work or called me by the wrong name, I had to bite my tongue to keep from snapping back. The old me would have just taken it, would have shrunk down and accepted whatever treatment she dished out. But knowing that Richard saw me as more than just the help had changed something fundamental in me. I started standing a little straighter when she spoke to me, looking her in the eye instead of staring at the floor. It was a small rebellion, but I could see it bothered her. She wasn't used to the help having any backbone. You seem different lately, Maria, she said one morning, using the wrong name like always. We were in the kitchen, and she was picking at her egg white omelet like it had personally offended her. Different how, Mrs. Ashworth? I kept my voice neutral, professional. more present. She studied me with those ice blue eyes. Before, you knew how to blend into the background properly. Now you're always right there, taking up space. Taking up space. Like my mere existence was an inconvenience she had to endure. 3 months ago, that comment would have made me want to disappear entirely. Now it just made me angry. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Victoria set down her fork and leaned back in her chair. That tone, that look in your eyes. You're forgetting your place. My place. As if my place was to be invisible, voiceless, less than human. I thought about Richard's hands on my face, the way he whispered my real name like it was something sacred. I thought about how he looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth something. I apologize if I've given you that impression, I said carefully. It wasn't my intention. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out what had changed. Then she waved her hand dismissively. Just remember who pays your salary, she said. And finish cleaning the pool house today. We're having people over this weekend. The pool house. Of course. It was her favorite punishment. A hot, stuffy building at the far end of the property that she only used for storage, but insisted on keeping spotless just in case. It would take hours to clean properly, and she knew it. Yes, ma'am, I said, already mentally preparing myself for an afternoon of scrubbing in the California heat. But as I gathered my supplies and headed outside, I found myself looking forward to the isolation. The pool house was far enough from the main house that no one would bother me there. It would give me time to think, to process everything that had been happening between Richard and me. I was halfway through organizing the storage closets when I heard footsteps on the wooden deck outside. Heavy footsteps. Male footsteps. Richard appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie in the heat. He'd changed out of his suit jacket into just dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Even disheveled, he looked incredible. Victoria said you were out here, he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. My heart started racing immediately. We were alone, truly alone, for the first time since that kiss in the hallway. No chance of Victoria walking in. No need to pretend we were just employer and employee. She wanted me to clean the pool house, I said, suddenly aware of how I looked. Sweaty, dusty, my hair escaping from its ponytail. She's punishing you. It wasn't a question. He could see right through his wife's games. It's fine. It's just work. But Richard was shaking his head, moving closer. It's not fine, Sarah. None of this is fine. He was right in front of me now, close enough that I could see the concern in his eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of sweat from the heat. She knows something's different about you, he said quietly. She can't put her finger on what, but she knows. Are you saying we should stop? The words came out smaller than I intended. His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. I'm saying we need to be more careful. But even as he said it, he was leaning down to kiss me. Soft at first, then deeper when I melted against him. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he backed me against the wall of the pool house. This was the opposite of careful. This was reckless and dangerous, and everything we'd promised ourselves we wouldn't do. But I couldn't stop, couldn't pull away from the heat of his mouth, the way his hands roamed over my body like he was trying to memorize every curve. Sarah, he breathed against my neck. God, what you do to me. His mouth found that sensitive spot just below my ear, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. My whole body was on fire, every nerve ending alive in a way I'd never experienced before. When his hand slipped under my t-shirt, finding bare skin, I thought I might actually die from wanting him so much. This was so far beyond anything I'd ever felt before, so far beyond the awkward fumbling of my college boyfriends. We should stop, I whispered, even as I arched into his touch. We should, he agreed, but his hands were mapping the curve of my waist, the line of my ribs, making me tremble. Neither of us stopped. We kissed like we were starving, touched like we were drowning, lost ourselves in each other until the world outside that small building ceased to exist. For those stolen minutes, there was no Victoria, no impossible situation, no consequences waiting to destroy us. There was just Richard and me, and the secret we were building between us. one dangerous moment at a time. 2 months into our secret, I was falling apart at the seams. The constant tension of living a double life was eating away at me from the inside. Every morning I woke up with knots in my stomach. Every night I lay awake replaying stolen moments and imagining all the ways this could end badly. The thing about secrets is they have weight. They sit heavy in your chest, making it hard to breathe normally. They change the way you move through the world. Always looking over your shoulder, always calculating risks. I'd become an expert at lying by omission, at deflecting questions about why I seemed distracted or tired. My sister Emma had called 3 times that week, worried because I sounded different on the phone. "You seem stressed," she kept saying. "Are you taking care of yourself? Maybe you should come home for a visit." But how could I explain that I was having an affair with my married boss? That I was risking everything for a man I could never really have? The worst part was how good it felt when we were together. Richard made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. When he looked at me, I saw myself reflected back as someone worthwhile, someone desirable, someone who mattered. After years of being invisible, it was intoxicating to be seen so completely. But the guilt was killing me. Not just about Victoria, though that was part of it, but about what I was doing to myself. I'd never been the kind of person who settled for scraps, who accepted being someone's secret. Growing up, my mom had always taught me to know my worth, to never let anyone treat me as less than I deserved. And here I was, sneaking around, settling for stolen kisses and hidden text messages. It all came to a head on a Friday evening in late October. I was gathering my things to leave, later than usual because Victoria had decided the guest bedrooms needed to be completely reorganized before her mother's visit. My back ached from moving furniture, and all I wanted was to go home to my apartment, take a hot shower, and try to forget about the mess my life had become. Richard appeared in the hallway as I was pulling on my jacket, and something in his expression made me stop. He looked serious, almost pained, like he'd been wrestling with something all day. "Sarah," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "We need to talk." My heart dropped. This was it. The conversation I'd been dreading. He was going to end things, tell me it had all been a mistake, probably fire me to avoid any future complications. I braced myself for the blow. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He gestured toward his study, and I followed him there on unsteady legs. The room smelled like leather and his cologne, familiar and comforting despite everything. He closed the door behind us, then turned to face me with those serious brown eyes. "I can't keep doing this," he said, and there it was, the end I'd been expecting. "I understand," I managed to say. It was getting too complicated anyway, but he was shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. I can't keep pretending this isn't real. I can't keep acting like what we have doesn't matter." I stared at him, confused. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of stolen moments and deleted text messages and pretending I don't want to be with you every second of every day." He ran his hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style. "I'm tired of watching my wife treat you like garbage while I stand there and do nothing." "Richard," I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the conversation I'd been expecting at all. "I know how this looks," he continued. "I know what people will think, that I'm just another rich guy taking advantage of the help. But that's not what this is, Sarah. What I feel for you, it's not just physical. It's not just some midlife crisis." He stepped closer, his eyes intense and sincere. "I love you." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. 3 words that changed everything and nothing all at once. Because what good did his love do me when he was married to someone else? When I was still just the housekeeper who could be dismissed at any moment? "You love me," I repeated, testing how the words sounded. They should have made me happy. Should have been everything I'd secretly hoped to hear. Instead, they just made me tired. "Yes," he said simply. "But you're married to a woman who hasn't touched me in 3 years, who treats everyone around her like they're beneath her notice, who married me for my money and status, not because she loved me." His voice was bitter now. "We don't even sleep in the same room anymore, Sarah. Haven't for over a year." I wanted to feel sorry for him. I really did. But I couldn't get past the fundamental truth of our situation. "That doesn't change the fact that you're still married to her. It could change." he said quietly. "I've been thinking about it. About leaving her." My heart stopped. "Richard, you can't be serious." "Why not? We're both miserable. We have been for years. The only reason we've stayed together this long is habit and appearances." He moved closer, reaching for my hands. "I could divorce her. We could be together properly. You wouldn't have to work as anyone's housekeeper ever again." It was a fantasy I'd played with in my weakest moments. Richard choosing me, leaving Victoria, us building a real life together. But hearing him say it out loud made me realize how impossible it really was. "And then what?" I asked. "Everyone will know I was sleeping with my married boss. Your friends, your business associates, your family, they'll all think I'm some gold-digging homewrecker who seduced you for your money. I don't care what they think. Well, I do." The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "I care because I'll have to live with those looks, those whispers. I'll always be the maid who broke up a marriage." Richard's face fell. "So what are you saying? That we should just end this?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd shown me kindness when no one else would. Who made me feel valuable and desired. This man who was willing to blow up his entire life for me. And I realized something that scared me more than anything else. I was falling in love with him too. Not just with the way he made me feel, but with him. With his gentleness, his integrity, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. I loved the way he listened when I talked, the way he remembered little details about my life, the way he looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. But loving someone and being able to build a life with them were two different things. "I don't know what I'm saying," I admitted. I need time to think. This is all so much." He nodded, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But as I gathered my things and headed for the door, I realized that time wasn't going to solve our fundamental problem. We could have all the time in the world, and it wouldn't change the fact that he was married and I was the help. It wouldn't change the way this started, or the way it would look to everyone else if we tried to make it real. At the door, I turned back to look at him one more time. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking lost and lonely despite being surrounded by all his expensive things. "Richard?" I said softly. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I love you too," I said. "That's what makes this so impossible." I left him standing there and walked out into the cool October evening, my heart breaking with every step, because sometimes loving someone means walking away from them, even when it's the last thing you want to do. But as I drove home through the winding streets of Beverly Hills, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that somehow, some way, I was going to have to make a choice between the safe, invisible life I'd been living and the dangerous, beautiful possibility of being truly seen. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure which one I would choose.